Hello? Did that work? Great. I've never done this before. Okay. I wanted to say, before I say anything, this is the biggest audience we've ever drawn. So give yourselves a big round of applause. I know I'm part of the reason for it, but maybe we should give credit to our guest speaker as well. Anyway, good evening. Welcome to the UC Davis Tahoe Environmental Research Center's Science Speaks seminar. My name is Jeff Schlatter. I'm the director of the UC Davis Tahoe Environmental Research Center. We refer to it as TERC. To learn more about TERC, the research we conduct here, the public education and citizen science that we run, the advice we give to agencies in the Tahoe Basin and to agencies running important watersheds and lakes and river basins around the world, please visit our website, tahoe.ucdavis.edu. You can also learn there how to follow us on social media and how to get engaged in what we do, be it citizen science, be it docenting at our Tahoe Science Center in Incline Village, and how you can help support the things we do. We put on these monthly lectures in part to be a venue for discussing science and important ideas every month, and we try to make them affordable for everybody to attend. If you want to support us additionally, that would be great through that website. Before I introduce before I introduce the introduction to the, I did want to call out, we are extremely well served by an advisory board, and 4 of our members are here tonight. I just wanted to call them out. You don't have to stand or say anything, but recognize Jerry Parker, Debbie Fitzgerald, Francis Pierce, and Tim Kozier. So please give them a tremendous hand because they try to rein me in as best they can, but try as they may. Well, okay. This is probably the last of our summer Science Speak series, so we'll be starting our fall ones on October 26th. Steve Sadro, professor in ecology from UC Davis, will be speaking about wildfire impacts on lakes on October 26th. He runs a network of lakes throughout the Sierra Nevada, so that will be interesting to many of you. We have our Tahoe Film Festival. Which one is this, Heather? The 5th? 6th? 9th? 9th. That's what COVID does. It's just, time flies. November 30th to December 3rd. Incredible. Some of these films have not been released in theaters yet. There's a whole spectrum of films to suit many people's interest. And December 7th, we have Herman Fillmore and Helen Fillmore speaking on the history of the Washoe tribe here in this region. Okay. So, this is written. I'm reading this. Kim Stanley Robinson is an American science fiction writer. You probably didn't know that. Yeah. He's also a natural, an environmental writer. And judging from this, he's also a romantic novelist as well. So good to find out. He's the author of about 22 novels, including the internationally best-selling Mars Trilogy. He was part of a U.S. National Science Foundation's Antarctic Artists and Writers Program in 1995 and 2016, and a featured speaker at COP26. So COP is the big climate conference held every few years. This one was in Glasgow as a guest of the UK government and the United Nations. Many of his novels and stories have ecological, cultural, and political themes and feature scientists as heroes. So clearly he's a nonfiction writer. He's won numerous awards, including the Hugo Award for Best Novel, the Nebula Award for Best Novel, and the World Fantasy Award. I think I'll stop there because I could go on forever and ever with all his achievements. And so with that, I'm going to hand the microphone to you, Stan. Special. You do that.
There we go. I got it. Yep. Oh, my Lord. Let's go back. Thank you, Jeff, for that kind introduction. And thank you all for coming tonight. What a pleasure for me. And I hope for you too as the evening goes on. I know for sure that I've got a bunch of Sierra lovers here in the audience. And I have to confess that I'll spend about 45 minutes here telling you things you already know with amateur photos of my own. So this is like a slideshow from the 1950s with your crazy uncle going on at huge length. And I want to say that I'm doing my best here to make it out of my book, which is 570 pages long with like 80 chapters. And we only have this 45 minutes. So I'm trying to select a few themes that can be illustrated and might be of interest to you. Even knowing the Sierras as well as you all do, it will be, I hope, angles that you will find of interest as we go forward. But mainly it's going to be constructed as a slideshow so we can enjoy all this together. So I have a friend who runs Planet Labs, a company that makes satellites the size of shoeboxes. And they first used dental drill motors as their gyroscopes. So it was completely do-it-yourself stuff from Home Depot. But now he's one of the major satellite companies, and he gave me these photos, and I asked him to make the shots. So we have from, Mono Lake and that strange bench of exposed granite in North Yosemite, down to the bottom of the Kern, essentially Langley, and the Great Western Divide, the Kauaias, the strange Kern Canyon, the Big King Canyon, the King of Canyons, and the Middle Fork of the Kings. And then there is a long caldera, nicely seen from space, a big old volcano that, or whatever a caldera is, blew up just 500,000 years ago, and blew up the Sierra Crest, such that Mammoth Mountain sits in the gap, the only gap between here and there of the High Sierra. And I enjoy looking at this and could spend the whole time of our together saying, oh my God, like look at, if I'm right about this, look at Desolation Lake. It's gigantic. Well, anybody who's been in Humphreys Basin, you come to the shores of Desolation Lake and it's off the scale. Looks like Lake Michigan or something. And it's indeed visible from space relative to the rest of the lakes, etc. But let's go on. Besides which, he gave me more, and these are at 60-degree angle. And that is, of course, Mount Whitney. And that is Lake Tahoe, the magic spot, Norman Clyde's favorite spot, hard to get to. And Mount Wallace and Wright, easier to get to, but not on trail. Beautiful stuff up here. The road to Whitney Portal, currently blown away by that hurricane, or tropical storm, and Whitney Portal and the walk up North Fork of Lone Pine Creek gets you to Iceberg Lake, gets you, over here, Iceberg Lake, and to, a close-up, also from space. And so here is Iceberg Lake, as usual in Iceberg. And here, maybe Whitney Pass over here. one of the easier passes, considering it's between Whitney and Russell, remarkably unhard. And the Mountaineers route, which John Muir took on his own, walking from Independence and up that slot and then up to the top of Whitney, having tried from the other side and failed to get there, and danced all night without a sleeping bag to keep from freezing. That's our Muir. And so I just include these because I love them so much. And here's one more from space, from Planet Labs, Doozy Basin. So the walk up to Bishop Pass, Doozy Basin is this giant quadrangle, the upper lake there, Thunderbolt Col, the Palisades, North Palisade, Brower Palisade, I call it, Middle Palisade, Agassiz, etc. And so these are the two big glaciers in the Sierra left, the Palisade Glaciers on the north side, and the Barrett Lakes, which I'll tell you a story about that later. The Palisades Basin, fantastic. Doozy Basin, fantastic. Big drop down to the Muir Trail, which is down in a canyon, as usual. So very quickly, I remind us of stuff we already know, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is a nice graphic that I took off the internet that I therefore couldn't put in the book because I don't know who owns it. But I can do it in a slideshow, and it's very illustrative of what we got here. And so we know the Sierra is a batholith that developed underground, and if it had volcanoes, which it did back in the old days, but our Sierra did not, it cooled underground. And if it had, then you would have Lhasa, you would have Shasta, you'd have the Cascades. They came to the surface as volcanoes, but the Sierra not. And so we have granite instead of volcanic rock. And a wonderful illustrator illustrated this to my request. That's the batholith about 80 million years ago. And so these are plutons, like the tooth-like features, individual plutons jammed together. They're bubbles of granite. They cool underground, taking 10 million years to cool. That's why all the crystals. And they're jammed together so that there are gaps between them, which is going to explain a lot about our Sierra. And so this is maybe 5 to 8 miles underground, and then the world happens, rain, weather, it all gets washed away down into the Central Valley, and we end up with that. So as it got, the overlayer got worn away, it was also tilting up. So as we all well know, and here's as clear an example of it as anywhere else, the west side, incredibly long, gentle approach, maybe 100 miles, an angle of very low. And then the east side, a big drop off, maybe 10 miles, the same kind of a drop. And that's the shape of our High Sierra. And also the Sierra all the way up to here. A pluton, these individual bubbles. I picked this picture because this is the Cartridge Pluton, and it's the clearest example I know of how the Sierra works morphologically for us walking over it. So this is taken from near Pinchot Pass. That's almost certainly Lake Marjorie down there, which has glacial silt in it. It makes it a lighter blue. And you go down the Muir Trail, and then you go up Upper Basin off here to the right. But notice this big chunk of granite. It's the Cartridge Pluton is famously whiter granite than the rest, more silica, less everything else. And so over here is Cartridge Pass, an old pass, no longer there. Mount Ruskin is one of these. Hilariously, this is called the vernacular needle, the least needle-like peak in the Sierra, and that's names in the Sierra. There's many a stupid name. That's probably one of the Palisades over here, but I'm not sure. So I include this because I am trying to be selective in my slides and have a little bit of instructive value to them, that this is an amazing picture of a Pluton top. And here's what I want to say. You want to be on Pluton tops as a Sierra backpacker. And indeed, the canyons between the Plutons, as you know, deep and not always easy to cross. In fact, this is what I'm leading up to. This is my own conceptual notion. The High Sierra has Pluton tops that the French would call massifs. These are massifs where all the land is high here and the canyons are between them. And so this is my own breakdown of the High Sierra. And probably I made a mistake here in terms of that's an oddity, but these canyons between them, on a backpacking trip, what you would want to do is get up onto one of them and circle them, go around on top. If you have to make the drop from one and go climb to the other, which does indeed happen sometimes, you are in for that 3,000 foot down, 3,000 foot up, sometimes no trail. And this is a workout. So getting on top of the great massifs and spending time up there. And some of them are not obvious until you've spent some time up there in the Bear Lakes. It doesn't occur to you that this is a big high tableland where you're up high all the time, and the ridges between the basins are maybe only 500 feet or 1,000 at most, rather than the monster 3,000 foot drop and rises, which, well, we'll get to this later maybe. 3,000 feet is not as bad as it could be. In Switzerland, it would be 6,000 feet. So this is why you have chairlifts in the Swiss Alps. And also, one point to make, the Muir Trail, famous as it is, tends to follow these canyons and connect up one canyon to the next. So about 75 to 80% of the Muir Trail is in canyons, which in middle age and old age, you can get fonder and fonder of canyons as such. But when I was young, it was all about being up higher in the basins, and canyons were just the way to get there. And I've never been fond of the Muir Trail. It's kind of like Highway 5. You use it to get to the better places. So Sierra granite always looks like this, right? And I don't even know for sure what peak this is, because there's probably 20 of them that somewhat resemble it. Might be Mount Rhinestein, but I don't know. And if it got rounded by a glacier, then it gets rounded to the top. This is Tehipite Dome. This is twice as tall as Half Dome. This is like 5,000 feet from the bottom to the top. And of course, the Native Americans worshipped it for reasons you can guess. And there is indeed a painted rock at the bottom of it, but the map, this was our badness. Using this map, we tried to find painted rock, and that probably covers a half mile. We never found painted rock. It's only one boulder painted on the underside. So I recommend to you both seeing Tehipite Dome, which is a pain in the ass to get to. You essentially, the best way is to go from the west, from Courtright Reservoir, and take this trail and then drop 3,000 feet into the valley. Not great fun, but then another 10 miles of untended trail gets you to Simpson Meadow. And anyway, it's hard to get to Tehipite Dome, but it's worth it. And in the 19th century, it was quite famous, the famous Tehipite Dome, because it was hard to get anywhere in the Sierra. So you would go see something like a 5,000-foot plinth. But once the road systems were set in, the further from the road, the more tendency to forget that it ever existed. So Yosemite Valley, everything's famous. Tehipite Dome, forgotten, more or less. I bet some of you have been there, and it's kind of great to see it. But don't use this as the map to find it. I never found it. And we maybe have, Scott, we have an archaeologist here tonight, I hope. Scott, good to see you. I bet you may have seen painted rock, but one thing all of us can see much easier is Hospital Rock, right on the road, coming up from Three Rivers up into Sequoia, and what an awesome thing. I suppose the whole Sierra was painted like this, but you need an overhang so the rain doesn't rain onto it for 5,000 years and wear it off. So this is underneath a bit of an overhang, and it's still there. It's the best petroglyph, or is it pictograph? Pictograph. Best pictograph in the Sierra, and it's right off the road. And you see perhaps birds bursting out of the heads of human beings. I mean, the kind of shamanistic, psychedelic aspect of Native American life is perhaps there. Depends on how what mood you're in when you look at it. Let's put it that way. So this is such a beautiful thought, and I've taught this by our California State archaeologist, Tom Berge, now retired. Notice the obsidian pieces everywhere in this soil. This is in Taboose Pass, just west of Taboose Pass, very clearly summer encampment. for thousands of years. And so there is obsidian all over this entire meadow by the thousands of pieces, such that late in the afternoon it'll gleam off of the sand. It looks like sand, but it's gleaming like a lot of broken glass, which it is, a lot of broken glass, black glass that had to have been brought up there. It's not endemic to the High Sierra. It came from Obsidian Dome down on 395 and was walked up there so that people could spend the summers. And the two dialects, Paiute and Monash, east side of the Sierra, west side of the Sierra, mutually comprehensible dialects of a larger language. No surprise to me, because this is where marrying out, this is two different communities getting together for the summers. Yes, I am a romance novel writer. A lot of romance is happening up here, and it is stunningly beautiful. Now, Taboose Pass is a big schlep, one of what I call the 4 bad passes. The east side passes that are more than 5,000 feet within about 10 miles on the big up. And it's usually your first day, you got a heavy weight, you're not acclimated. The 4 bad passes are quite an experience and worth doing all 4, but Taboose is special. For one thing, it's gorgeous the whole way up. And for another thing, it's only 6 miles, 6,000 feet. It's over fast. You're thrashed at the end of it. Fall asleep before sundown, but worth doing because you are wandering in a village that is possibly 10,000 years old and for sure 5,000 years old. And that's a beautiful thing to experience. So, on to a different lesson. We're going from that now to, yeah, I can, to rock quality. Okay, so the Sierra, white granite, right? And the batholith is granite. But that older rock, that country rock that was over it when it was 10 miles underground, not all of it wore away. And so there is this metamorphic rock that hangs on the top of the Sierra Nevada. And these districts are well known to all of us, and they are a different kind of rock. They are as hard as granite, sometimes even a little harder, and they haven't worn away, and they are nowhere near as friendly to humans as the white granite is. So you have a different experience when you're in these parts of the Sierra, which cover maybe 10 to 15% of the High Sierra proper. Again, Elizabeth Whaley drew this to my instructions to give you the idea. So there's some of that black rock. This is the Goddard Divide with a glacier and a bergschrund and a contact zone between white granite and black rock that is rather perfect. There is a very famous bit of old metamorphic rock, the minarets, just seen from, Mammoth Crest. And I just got this photo last year, and I swear nothing was done to this photo. That's the minarets from the west, from Bench Canyon, and it's not been vertically exaggerated like happens to your emails when it gets sent back to you. That's the actual look of the backside of the minarets, and it's a metamorphic rock that is Gothic and crumbly, dangerous. It's where Pete Starr got killed, I think, on this one. And it sits there as I call it an alien subrange, lying on top of the ordinary Sierra just to give it variety. Give it a little bit of, okay, the Sierras have got everything, including these weirdo little alien subranges. This is Mount Goddard, which a friend of mine calls God's Turd. A mass of metamorphic rock, and indeed the whole Goddard area is one of the biggest metamorphic sections of country rock. You can see how red and weird it is, and indeed a half hour later, that was it at sunset. So you got alpenglow and red rock. And I would say that if you just gave this casually to someone, they would not immediately say this is the Sierra Nevada. But of course it is, right in the middle. And you can spend the night on top of Mount Goddard, as Phil Arnaud taught us. Great Sierra person. Very easy to, although I have to confess I haven't done it because we didn't make it, but to spend the night up there, it's one of the best views of the Sierras. It's about maybe 20 miles to the west of the crest, and you can see all the way from Ritter and Banner down to Whitney and Langley. So it is a remarkable prospect for seeing things. This is Chasm Lake on the way down to the Enchanted Gorge, and I just have it, again, country black rock mixed with white granite, and obviously some marble cake work was being done there. Same with this, old black rock and the white granite. And this is just west of Martha Lake and maybe the White Divide. It's near the Ionian Basin. The Ionian Basin is simply a marble cake of white and black and marvelous in every way. Very remote and spacey, but also a black and white thing. And this is the last of the black and whites. This is the northwest side of Mount Clarence King. Very few people go here, and this medallion is with its beautiful, like, leaping antelope or whatever the heck. I mean, it's obviously an accident, but it is a very beautiful accident to camp under. Hard to get to, but worth it. So now from rock to ice. This is the maximum extent of glaciation. Again, I took this off the internet. And you see that actually desolation in the area north of 80, it was iced over being so far north and so flat. Same with Yosemite and all the way down the range. It's a simple thing to say this. As a backpacker, go where the ice was. Don't go below it, because then you'll be in a forest and you'll be dirty and you'll be bored. Go above it. Go where the ice was and love life. That's what Sierra backpacking is all about. Here's a more detailed glacial map made by glaciologists after Francois Mathis. That's Kings Canyon. That's the Middle Fork. Tehipite Dome is right about there. And you can see that there were a lot of nunataks sticking out. And so the glaciation of the Sierra is one of the great coincidences of making it beautiful for backpackers. It was glaciated, but lightly glaciated. So you still have massifs, you still have some flat land to walk across. You don't have nothing but up and down in a cliff-like way, such as certain other ranges like the Swiss Alps, by the nemesis of the Sierra, or maybe of me. The Swiss Alps are scary, dangerous, and the Sierras are friendly, happy. And it's because, although it was glaciated, perhaps 1/10 as glaciated as the Swiss Alps, because of the Gulf Stream and the northern latitude and all of the other factors that made the Swiss Alps iced over about 10 times as much as the Sierra. But the Sierra got their ice, and it made a difference. So this is a very famous schematic by William Morris Davis. Mountains, they start like this. The ice comes during an ice age and eats them away. And then when the ice leaves after the ice ages, you have this. You have the hanging valleys down to the canyons. You have the higher basins. You have to understand, Davis was in the Alps and in the Norwegian Alps. He wasn't in the Sierra when he made these schematics. And so you get the mechanism of why glaciation matters. And for those, since you guys are all Sierra people, that's, of course, looking just like the White Mountains, which didn't get much glaciation, being in the rain shadow of the Sierra. This might have been what the Sierra looked like during the Ice Age. This is what it looks like now, except not. This is what the Alps look like now. The Sierras, they look like that. I concentrated on this. And what I mean is, it is so lightly glaciated that the basins have not met each other and turned into steep, sharp ridges with gendarmes and horn peaks. There's still parts of the Sierra that, although glaciers made these, they also left these. And so you get like that. You see, in the Swiss Alps, that would not be there. The ice would have met on both sides, and it would be more like this. But the Sierra has a lot of this high rock, tops of plutons that never got glaciated, and were often out of the ice during the ice ages. They were nunataks, and they sit up there, and they're sandy as hell. They're DG, decomposed granite, with their own life communities, a beautiful biome and great to walk on, of course. One of the things that makes the Sierra what they are is that with some effort, you can get on top of these monsters, like the Dana Plateau near Tioga Pass, but they're all over. And one of them, this is going up to Mount Langley. That's Mount Langley. It's just a summer snowstorm, and we're going over New Army Pass. That's probably Old Army Pass right there. That ramp, which is an easy thing to walk or even run, you see runners all the time, it wouldn't be there in the Swiss Alps. It would have the glacier on this side would have et over to here. The glacier on this side would have met it, and you would be on a knife-edge ridge. So this is, I like having this understanding of why the Sierra is so friendly to walkers. Okay, the Ice Age is over, and this I just took from an ordinary flight from Sacramento to Las Vegas, the Palisades Glaciers with no snow. This was probably 2015 with an iPhone. That's the biggest glacier left in the Sierra. And the second biggest one is right next to it, and then these are the Norman Clyde glaciers, et cetera, et cetera. I was happy to see it. There's a current glacier in the Dumbbell Basin. Look at the beautiful moraine. And the glacier is still in there, maybe. That might be that it is going to turn into just a pile of rock that was a glacier and will look like a glacier for thousands of years. Or it might have an ice core. You could assign graduate students, or you could probably use LIDAR now. There's probably ground-penetrating radar that would tell you if that's icy or not. But in any case, there were a lot of these, and notice that it's early afternoon, but it's already going to be in the shade. The northeast sides of Sierra Peaks, they're steeper because they're more eaten by ice, which is sometimes still there. But you know, we're in climate change. And I want to share a story with you that is relatively new to me. This is the top of Dead Man Canyon. I love it because Coppermine Pass, this is actually the peak, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is also the pass. There's a trail that Judge Wallace built for mules to come up here. You can still take it, go right over the peak, go down the ridge line, and get to his copper mine, which I put in quotation marks. It was totally bogus. It was just his excuse to spend every summer in the Sierra. He was a respectable judge, and he would say to people, you know, in June, oh, sorry, I got to go tend to my mine. And then he would wander the Sierras like any other Sierra nut, but he was a miner, so he had excuses back in respectable Fresno. And Wallace was a character. It's great that there was a Wallace Lake. And this is, you got to visit his mine. It's hilarious. It's like a rabbit hole with a lot of green rocks at the bottom of it with some pieces of wood. You see this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 glaciers, and a little one over here. This is the fall of 2021, and that's the top of Dead Man Canyon. Those glaciers are gone, and they were there when we visited them in 2007, I'm going to say. They were definitely there in 91, but I think they were still there in 2007, and they were so small that climate change has melted them away. And there is the last fragment of the biggest one right there. And we were going to be in trouble that night, counting on the water that comes from these glaciers and the snowbanks for our water that night in camp. And there was no water to be had except for what was trickling out of this poor thing, right down into here where we camped. And I walked on up to the remnant there, and that's what's left. It's about the size of maybe 3 or 4 swimming pools at a tilt. It could be gone by now. That was September of 21, although who knows, that you saw last winter better than I did. It might have been refurbished a little bit, but in general, the glaciers are gone. Even Palisades Glacier, it's a goner. It's not going to last through this century. May come back later, but it's a goner for now. And I must admit, in fact, some of you do know Mondo Quintero because he's a famous Sierra person and now head of California State Parks. I went back from that trip in shock. I don't know what I was grieving for, but I was grieving. Maybe for the Sierra. Mondo goes, well, Stan, it's a sky island. It's a sky island. There have been droughts so bad that Lake Tahoe was 200 feet lower, and there were full-on sized trees that we find 200 feet below water in Lake Tahoe. The droughts have been terrible, like the ones that sent the Anastasi somewhere else. And all the time, the Sierra's there, and it's near the Pacific. Some water's going to hit it. And whatever's up in the Sierra now has gone through major droughts since the end of the Ice Age, really major droughts. So, of course, we're going to create a super drought with our climate change, but we're also going to have to fight back and deal with it, or else we ourselves are hammered. So he suggested something I want to share with you. The Sierras are like the canary in the coal mine kind of a situation. Okay, the canary's dead, but that means we have to try not to kill ourselves as well. And in the saving of ourselves, a resilient extremophile biome like the High Sierra, being used to radical extremes of temperature, of radiation from the sun, et cetera, that they're going to survive, and there will be deaths, there will be inns of ponds, the glaciers will be gone, but it doesn't mean that it's going to turn into one of those desiccated basin and range Nevada dead ranges, which is what I was fearing when I saw the glaciers gone. We need to attend to it, but it's not like my shock and grief was perhaps out of proportion to the reality of the situation. So many thanks to Mondo for calming me down about that. Okay, let's change to something more fun. I needed to change to something more fun, and one always does. The fun of wandering in the High Sierra. You end up in moments like this. Not all of us got across that log, but the water was only thigh deep. So Terry, of course, got over it, and then we also had to, and we're not as good as him. But whatever, this is what walking in the Sierras is like. So sometimes quite cosmic, Forester Pass, dynamited out, and the trail is indeed spectacular. The High Sierra Trail with the dynamited tunnel, Forester Pass with I don't think I would want to have built that particular section of trail, but someone did. That's the north side of Forester. The High Sierra Trail going past right above these two beautiful, this double waterfall on the way up to Precipice Lake and the Kaweah Gap. The trails are fantastic. But even more so is the basins that have no trails, not even a trail up to the bottom of them. And there are there's 20 named ones. And since the basin is simply the top of a glacier, and you saw that map of the glacier cap, I would guess that there, depending on definitions and how small you wanted to get, since it's fractal, there's probably 100 basins in the High Sierra. Each one of them could be your favorite. Each one of them will be fantastic. They will be different whether they're facing north, south, east, west, or any of the angles of the compass. They will have a different vibe. They will be different whether they're facing out into the Big Valley and Owens Valley or facing out into other parts of the Sierra. They'll be different if they're granite or if they're metamorphic rock, which will be pokey and stick you in the back and be dirty and be a different kind of a ground and different kind of plants, although it'll be quite wonderful also. So all of the basins are fantastic. This one is Dumbbell Basin, hard to get to, one of my special favorites. And a lot of times in a basin, you are wandering, tiptoeing through the tulips kind of way, in that it's not hard work to cross a lawn like that. And this is what we love. So a basin. The word is unusual and used only in this sense in the Sierra Nevada. It's probably Joseph LeConte Jr.'s fault, although I think he picked it up from others. A basin, like a wash basin in your bathroom, is round all the way around. And they use it that way in geology too. The Tarim Basin, the Great Basin, where there's a rim all the way around and water goes down in the middle and it dries out in a playa. That's what a basin is. So in the Sierra, it's not that way. It's like this. And I'm proud to say I drew this myself, and I couldn't get Elizabeth Whaley to do a better version. You see what I'm saying? It's a horseshoe, and you go over a pass that gets you into a basin. Nobody is there. There's no trails. You go out the other way on another side, or if you have to and want to, you can go down the exit stream, the hanging valley, down to the canyon below, often 500 feet, 1,000 feet, not usually more. And this is the special space of the High Sierra, because in the Alps, they've been ground away. You simply go from there to there in a single shot, and there you have your chairlift or whatever. But for walking, for camping, for being with these little ponds, this is what the light glaciation of the Sierra has left. And it is a worthy goal, especially if you're not a climber. You don't want to get on vertical faces, and that's me for sure. A worthy goal to visit as many basins as possible and just spend a night in them and go on to another basin, or spend a week in them and explore them. That's Sierra life. Let's see. Okay. So, named basins. This one is between the Kaweahs and the Great Western Divide. Quite wonderful. Black rock on this side, or red, ferocious, and then beautiful white granite on this side. And It's a neat pass. It's a double pass up here, Lion Pass, which we did a couple of years ago when we were going to Dead Man Canyon. Fantastic. Pioneer Basin. This is just near Mono Pass. And note that the pioneers, so-called pioneers, Hopkins, Crocker, Stanford, and Huntington. And so I call this the robber baron basin myself. And if you go to caltopo.com, which has all of the informal names, including our Mount Thoreau on caltopo.com, a beautiful map, I must say. And God, I love them because they put our Mount Thoreau name on the peak across from Mount Emerson, which we named in 2016, perhaps, in a great party that we went up and we christened this mountain that didn't have a name, Mount Thoreau, and it was right across from Mount Emerson. It's on caltopo.com. And similarly, on caltopo.com, that peak is called Robber Baron Peak. So someone was thinking the same as me. It's an obvious thought to have. And I'm thinking, this is a terrible set of names. The late 19th century, the early 20th century, the naming of the Sierra Nevada mostly by Sierra Club people, these were terrible, often terrible names. Round Lake, Granite Pass. I mean, they're either obvious or they're silly, or they celebrate scientific racists, or they celebrate, like this could be Mount Musk, Mount Zuckerberg, Mount Jobs, and Mount Bryn, and yeah, exactly. That's not a good idea. And so this wasn't a good idea either. And there aren't enough women names in the Sierra, so in my book I have chapters on let's change all the names. And I'm partly playing around, I'm partly serious. So when you got a nice set like this, I had two suggestions. Mount Edna Ferber, Edith Wharton, Zora Neale Hurston, and Willa Cather. That would be a sweet quartet. These were great writers, and they wrote right at the time where you had to be a man who had been in a war to be taken seriously as a novelist. Very silly attitude to take. And these writers were great. And then someone said, but wait, a lot of them, Edith Wharton, New York novelist, and I thought, California women writers, these could very easily be Mount Ursula K. Le Guin, Mount Molly Gloss, Mount Karen Joy Fowler, and Mount Cecilia Holland. Sure, why not? This is really what should happen. So there were about 5 or 6 naming chapters in my book, and I had a grand time. Coming out of a basin, this is the Castle Domes, and I'm going to try to hurry up here, but coming out of the basin, you drop into the canyons. It's probably 1,000 to 1,500 feet of drop between that white thing and that far wall there. In other words, the canyons are skinny and they're deep. And, you got to do it. It's one way but one thing's for sure, I doubt anybody has gone up the Castle Dome cracks because they're neither climbing nor hiking. They are suffering. The basins are often more like this. This was in the last big snow year, 2011, or one of the last ones in Doozy Basin, one of the very greatest of them. If you don't want to be climbing out of a canyon without a trail. And here's my buddies, Daryl and Carter, were coming out of the canyon that the Muir Trail is in, Bubbs Creek Canyon, and going over University Shoulder. I do not recommend that. That was a mistake. The guidebooks sometimes say, class 2. But class 2 has a wide variety of, there should be an extra number for effort. So technical difficulty class 2, effortfulness 11. Getting from basin to basin can also be hard. This is Observation Pass and Observation Peak, and this is an ordinary class 2 pass, and foreshortening makes it look quite ferocious. But once you get up on it, and here's a clue that it took us a while to learn, if the cliff is fuzzy, there's a talus on it. That talus wouldn't be there if it weren't 35 degrees or less. It would have fallen off and been a cliff like the cliff over here. So we look at that, we go, and then up on it, it looks like this. It's not that bad. I mean, it's doable. You can walk it. You don't feel like you're going to die. And it wasn't even that hard. Many passes are like that, and those are the good ones. Bushwhacking, on the other hand, is always bad. This is George Creek, and there are many bushwhacks in the Sierra, canyons, in effect, that don't have trails in them. I used to like them in a kind of a masochistic way, and I hope I still do, because I'm going to try one in about 2 weeks that is famous for badness, but I figure why not? The old Muir Trail went up Cartridge Creek from the Middle Fork, and the trail has been gone since 1932 when they made Mather Pass and they sent the trail up Palisades. But Joseph LeConte and his wife Helen, they used to go up Cartridge Creek with their burros and horses. It was a real trail with switchback still at the Triple Falls. So we're going to see if we can find the switchbacks of the old Muir Trail. But it's going to involve like this. And of course, I don't like it, stream crossings. Better if you can find a fallen tree that fell across that creek. Oh my gosh, isn't it a blessing when those things show up? I want to say, as a high altitude person, that the forests in the canyons are gorgeous, and some of them, like this one, would have been drowned if the Bureau of Reclamation had put in the dam at the Middle Fork. Really, there was a cutout in Kings Canyon National Park. The whole valley floors of the Middle Fork and the South Fork were cut out of the park in case they built a dam down there and drowned Kings Canyon. This was perfectly possible in 1940. It's only recently that they decided they would never do that and made it national park all the way down. But this forest would have been underwater. And the meadows in the canyons, gorgeous. This is Grouse Meadow. I just wanted to include those because some people accuse me of being kind of a rock hound and not fond of forest. And it's true, but it isn't totally true. And then you're at campsite at the end of the day. This is above Lake Marjorie, and the beauty and peace of sunsets. I cut out about 50 sunset photos because you've all seen them. The camping early in the afternoon, if it's early enough, there's time to make little Stonehenges with some incredibly good chatter marks, by the way, on this granite. Look at the way the glacier has pushed a rock down into that rock. Bang, 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 bang. I like that geologists call it chatter mark because they have to imagine the sound of, one boulder hitting rock underneath a mile of ice. It's an inventive and clever name, chatter marks. And of course, we tip these over when we're done. We don't leave them. We don't want to mess with other people's experience of wilderness. Oh my God, people have been here. I hate that. I often knock over trail ducks if they seem to me not functional. And more sunset. Oh yeah, sunset can sometimes get quite extraordinary in terms of showing you things, because this is over in the Milestone Basin, over on the Great Western Divide, at Milestone Peak, looking back at Whitney and Russell. And then you can see that although Russell is a mighty peak, more than 14,000 feet, Whitney is a real chunk of rock. And it seems, I can't be sure where Muir went up it, but he only did it once. And when he took young men up the second time, he crossed up here over to here because he didn't want to go up that last section of the Mountaineers route twice. He didn't want to endanger other people than themselves. And that does look pretty fierce. So we do some snow camping, mostly on snowshoes. We retired from cross-country skis because we were falling too much. And snowshoes makes it easier to look around. Every trip we started like this. And we had satellite, we had weather reports for much of our lives, but we only had the departure day was the departure day. And taking off in a snowstorm can be exciting. When it's not snowing, it is quite spectacular, and I'm sure many of you will recognize Humphreys here. You can get into nasty situations where if you combine snow and bushwhacking, which I have stupidly done here in order to dodge the Eschenbacher ledges over here, I thought, well, I'll just go down this thing, but I don't know how I got there, and I don't know how I got out of there. It happens. Campsites in the snow can be rudimentary and desperate because you just have to find a flat spot fast, or they can be quite beautiful and special. And at night, especially low enough, under 10,000 feet, you can have a fire. We only do this when it's snowing or when we're on snow trips. And we're well under, where there's wood everywhere, because of course we've given up on fires in the Sierra. But this was just about 7,000 feet overlooking Hacheche, and there was a lot of wood around, and we had a fire. It was so unusual. It was fantastic. And then in the morning, you can have the beauty of camp. And in snow, there's no trails, there's no people, there's no mosquitoes. It's pretty great. And it's not that cold. Really isn't. Actually, a lot of you know this because you are Sierra people, and some of you have been in colder places than the Sierra. It's not that cold in the winter, and you want it colder than freezing, and you don't want it colder than about 10. And danged if the Sierra doesn't just stick in that zone pretty much all winter long. It's quite fabulous. And you can go up to the top of Williamson in the snowshoes. That was why the bushwhacking up George Creek. And so there's Independence down below. Well, maybe. That's Independence, maybe. Well, wait, that's Lone Pine. But in any case, it's like an airplane. You're like you're in an airplane, but you're up in the Sierra. And occasionally, and this is just desolation, Island Lake on the other side of desolation, the lake froze, then the wind blew it all apart, and then it refroze. And I really thought I was in a dream hiking down onto this one day. And it was in one of those winters where there wasn't any snow, but there was ice because it was cold, but snowless. Worth going up there in the winter to see things like this. So quickly, the animals, the rock star of the High Sierra, the marmot, they like to have their photos taken. They do the Ingrid Bergman thing. They tilt their head to the side. They're hilarious characters. The deer are not afraid of people. Notice Terry's foot. And, it's like the deer was like, "Why are you on my trail?" Young bears don't like to be seen. They're abashed. They're embarrassed. They try to get out of the way. Old bears are like, "What are you doing?" And actually, this bear was so big that none of our photos were in focus. we clearly, hands were shaking as we had to walk by this guy. It was one of the more awesome encounters of my life. So close and so black of a bear. For me, an unusual experience. And of course, the pika, the champion, the great spirit of the High Sierra, living in its rocks and collecting food. You know, it doesn't hibernate like the marmots. It gathers and dries grass all summer long and has it tucked away, and it's subnivean. It lives under the snow. It's on a sky island basis. It can't have its body more than the air can't be 80 degrees for more than an hour, or they overheat and get hyperthermia. So they go deeper into holes, they go higher up. At a certain point, they're going to get islanded out. So they're another canary in the coal mine, the pika, but meanwhile, they seem to be everywhere, and they're very assertive little guys and beautiful. And the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep, which I thought I would never see. There are said to be about 600 now, but when I started backpacking, there were 100. And it's been the success of the Endangered Species Act to help these guys to get back up there. And 600 is good, more will be better. They'll always have a genetic bottleneck in their past. They'll be able to date. You know, if they get back to full health, there'll still be a moment where there was only 100 of them. And these three were very suspicious of us. Like, what are you doing here? Because we were, again, off trail. And then this herd. Oh my God, it was a great moment. After being in the Sierras 40 years, suddenly a full-on herd of Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep. So yay for the Endangered Species Act and for federal science, for our US government, of the people, by the people, for the people, saving our cousins. I love it very much. We're also working on the yellow-legged frog, endangered because of putting fish in every single damn Sierra lake for fishermen. This was a crazy idea. And it hasn't quite stopped, but also, luckily, the national park ecologists and the national forest ecologists, maybe the California state ecologists, are clearing ponds of fish, and they're very happy about it. Gill nets, some dynamite, maybe some poison, although that, of course, has its downsides, since you kill everything, and then you hope it's the frogs that come back and not the fish. Many of these ponds should not have fish at all, And so getting rid of them is another good thing that's going on. Quickly birds, mountain bluebird, that's low altitude. The grouse, they're all over. They're hilarious. That's a mom running away, making sounds, come after me, and she's saying to her kids, stay away, stay in the bushes. And the kids were all following her, going, Mom, why are you so upset? And they're following her. She's going, no, get away, I'm trying to sacrifice myself. And the kids are like, but why? Don't leave us. And so as a survival strategy, it wasn't working. It seldom works. But grouse are beautiful. And an osprey. And rosy finches, less of them because of the fish in the ponds that screw up their lives. I've seen this now 3 times, a bald eagle over the High Sierra. Pretty common bird in some places, but not in the High Sierra, so that was a glorious thing to see. And a coyote on the beach. Somebody says, just read it yesterday, wolves in Sequoia National Park. Now this is one of those folk rumors everybody wants to believe, but the scientists have not yet got the DNA. And there can be really big coyotes in the High Sierra. So, okay, let's hope it's wolves, but even if it's coyotes, it's pretty fabulous. And this is on the shore of that Desolation Lake I pointed out, which if you draw back a little, there's a couple more mammals, my son and his friend. The shore of Desolation Lake, look at that. I mean, it beggars the imagination to have a lake that is, Lake Wanda is almost as big, but it's cut by a peninsula. But Desolation Lake is simply off scale and remarkable to hike around and look at. So, very quickly, the people. Yay, John Muir. And the reason I want to give you John Muir is this is his freshman college portrait. And I taught freshman composition. I recognize this look. This is the deer in the headline. This is the poor freshman that has been abused at home. I mean, in his case, literally abused, but like a fairy under a seashell. Suddenly he's in college. He'd never even seen a camera. And then 10 years later, after 5 years in the Sierra, there's our man. He knows what he likes. He knows the world. So that was a good 10 years for John Muir. Clarence King, what a weird life. Read about him. He led a double life. By day, he was head of the U.S. Geological Survey. By night, he was a black Pullman porter operator with an African-American wife who had been a slave and 4 children. The 2 sons fought as African-Americans in World War I. The 2 daughters got married as white women. So his life, what a tangle, what a beautiful thing. And he's a marvelous writer about the Sierra Nevada. People say he lies a lot, but I think he was just excited. And this is Mount Clarence King. And so this is the only peak in the Sierra that is a true horn, like the Matterhorn, like the Swiss horns. Glaciers on all 3 sides, and it makes a peak because it's being eaten away from all sides. Sierras aren't typically like that, where you've got the sloped side and the steep side at best. But they were on Mount Brewer. They saw this peak to the north. They named it after Clarence King. He was a lucky man in many, many ways. Mary Austin, a lucky woman in many, many ways. Tough woman, great writer. And she lived in Independence. Her house is still there as a state monument, or at least it has a sign outside saying it was hers. She's mostly a desert person, desert writer, but she did go up to Kearsarge Pass a couple times and write about the Sierra, so I count her as a Sierra person. And there is a Mount Mary Austin overlooking Independence, and it was named by this guy, the pack who walked like a man, Norman Clyde. And Norman Clyde, too, was a soulful character, a beautiful guy, not a writer, but a reader of Homer and Greek, and he lived in the Sierras. He was married young. His wife died of TB. He went to the Sierras, and he never came back. That's Norman Clyde's story. With 50 first ascents, which is, impossible to do now, but hard to do at any time. And at the Bancroft Library, you can see the summit registers for all of the peaks in the Sierras on that system. There are 253 of them, 50 first ascents Norman Clyde, but every single register I ever looked in was signed into by Norman Clyde with a comment on the weather, and sometimes several times. And so in the 1920s, he was just spending his time up there going from peak to peak. And but you can see in his face that it was a kind of a getting away. There is Helen Marion Gompertz LeConte, Sierra Club worthy, and she and Joe LeConte getting married, little Joe LeConte, the son, was the big event for the Sierra Club. Oh my God, it takes up a whole issue of the magazine. Marion Lake is named after her. She wrote many fine columns for the Sierra Club Bulletin in the early years, and I want to point out that the Sierra Club was an early feminist organization, mostly because of William Colby. Huge encouragement to get women up into the Sierras in the early Sierra Club days. They went to the sororities at UC Berkeley and Stanford, said, come on up, gals, and they said to all the wives, you got to be here too. And for a lot of women, this was like an escape to freedom. 1 month a year, they were Sierra people. And the rest of the time, they were in Edwardian America doing what they had to. And so Helen is a fabulous writer, and so is Marion Randall Parsons. She was Muir's last assistant, a good writer, and a painter, and she was said to be able to play all of Beethoven's sonatas by memory on the piano, but only if no one was in the room with her. So this is like the, I reckon that we would now rate her well onto the autistic spectrum. But she married an older man person who died shortly thereafter, and after that she stayed with the Sierra Club. She made about 50 ascents of hard mountains, and there's a Mount Parsons in South Yosemite that's named after her husband, but I think it's named after her by acclamation. Peggy Wayburn, she was a debutante from a New York private university like Brandeis or Smith or Radcliffe, perhaps, I forget which. And she married a guy that she fell in love with, and it turned out he was head of the Sierra Club, Ed Wayburn. She came out on a Sierra trip and had to take off high heels and immediately was up in Kings Canyon. Spent a month. Her essay about it is hilarious. And she became a wilderness writer, quite well known. And this photo is actually on the path between the Cliff House in San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge. That path that's along the coastline, there's one plaque. I think Ed and Peggy got that trail in San Francisco made into a formal walking trail. And her writing is excellent, especially the essay about her first month in the Sierra. And that's me and Gary Snyder. I needed to acknowledge the great man of the mountains, our leader, our guru figure, the guy that taught me what a California man writer ought to be. Didn't have to be alcohol and fast cars and whorehouses in the middle of the night, even though Kerouac and that whole crowd seemed to be saying that was the only way to be a real American writer, man. And then there's Gary, a hippie who has spent 10 years in a Zen monastery in Japan, came back and settled in these very same mountains and had a family and created a life with a community. Well, a beautiful guy. I just saw him last week. He's doing very well. He's 92, or I think he's going to be 93 soon, but he's doing quite well, and I'm sure he would say hi to everybody. Now, I couldn't put these in the book. There's a chapter called Young People in Love. What I'm noticing now in the Sierras is, of course, almost everybody up there is younger than I am. And they are having as good a time as I ever had, for sure. Why? Because it's the same thing. It's backpacking in the Sierra. So I started taking their photos. That only began a few years ago. I wish I'd done it longer. But now when I run into people in the Sierra, instead of thinking, oh, shit, I ran into somebody, because often you don't. Instead, I think, oh my gosh, a person. Let's talk to them. Let's get their stories. What's their trail itinerary? Why are they there? And they're always happy to talk, and it's become a beautiful addition to my Sierra life. So this couple came from Chicago. They work in finance. They carry 50-pound backpacks on the shore of Lake Michigan to stay in shape for the Sierras. They backpacked all over the American West, and then they started coming to the Sierras as being the best place to backpack, which is obvious to all of us. They had just come over Frozen Lake Pass, and they were happy to be alive. This pair, I know nothing about them, but they are strong. I would guess soccer players or cross-country runners or swimmers, long-distance swimmers. They flew by our campsite in Sunset and disappeared. They were navigating by iPhone and GPS, and they were zooming around the Ionian Basin as if it were a playground, which it is. And so I asked if I could take their picture. I just want to say, 2 days later, I ran into 2 women on the Muir Trail itself, nearby. And one short, one tall. They looked roughly like that. I said, hey, were you in the Ionian Basin the day before yesterday? No. And I felt like, oh man, I'm getting old. I can't tell one young woman from another anymore. They all looked the same. And I was just thinking, what an idiot. Maybe I need new glasses. And then one of them said, I bet you ran into our sisters. My sister is hiking with her sister, and they are a lot faster than us. I'm thinking, so I felt a whole lot better. This woman's from Moscow. She had a purse over her shoulders and sturdy walking shoes like anybody would wear. This is Lamarck Cole, and it's about 5 p.m. I said, what are you going to do? She said, well, I'm going to walk back down to my car. She was going to be walking in the dark. She just did this out of San Francisco. She had a tech job in San Francisco. She liked the Sierras. She just goes up and walks by herself up as far as she can get, walks back down, dressed like this. Wonderful Russian accent. And this is Norma and Tina. They were going to be climbing Mount Miriam and Mount Royce. And we were going in at Big Pine, and I just asked if I could take their picture. These are climber gals, not just walkers. And so it could go on like that forever. Almost the last story here. We were in the Palisades Basin, and I was leading, and I don't like leading. I don't like being a guide for other people. But these were great guys, and one of them was a reporter from the New Yorker who was going to be writing about me in the Sierra. And I was in Palisades Basin, and I was thinking, damn, I wonder why that campsite wasn't there that I know so well. And this guy showed up on the morning we were going to leave over Thunderbolt Pass, and he gestured. He wanted to talk. He said, can you help tell me where I am? And I said, oh, hell yeah, I can help tell you where you are. And he said, I thought I was at Knapsack Pass. And I said, well, yeah, you were. And he said, well, where are we right now? And I pointed to the map. I said, we're right here. And he goes, no, we're not. I was at that lake a half hour ago, and I know for sure. And I thought, that's why that campsite wasn't there. I had been lost in Palisades Basin for about 18 to 20 hours without knowing it. Just a mild feeling of something's different here. But I would have taken that reporter from the New Yorker over Isosceles Pass instead of Thunderbolt Pass, and it would have been a disaster. Partly because I would have been cursing myself for the whole trip out, and he would have had to say in there, Robinson seems kind of hard on himself. He's very irritable, and Robbie, you idiot. But this guy was in the right place, but he thought he was in the wrong place. I was in the wrong place, but I thought I was in the right place. We were perfectly symmetrical. We solved each other's problem. He was from Nashville, Tennessee. He just bought the Roper High Route book and a map. He had never been up there before. Got a backpack on. I said, how did you get in shape in Nashville, California? He said, I went up and down my driveway. I said, you went up and down your driveway? And he said, well, my driveway is 4 miles long. And so his name is Tim. Maybe he's a great country star, because I could never see his face in this Lawrence of Arabia hat. And I was so blown away by being in the wrong place that I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't get his last name. So if that's a famous country star, then more power to him. I'm going to end with this. There is Doozy Basin and Agassiz, and this is, of course, at sunset. Strange things happen in the light. And here's our great California artist, Tom Killian, same place. My first night in the Southern Sierra was about there. And so I have a copy of this print. I love it dearly. Killian is a great artist, and the fact that he's ours is amazing. I give you a standard juniper, and then the Killian junipers, foxtail pines in this case, but you know, we've got such an artist to make our Sierras and our coastline, our Northern California. What a lucky thing. Most places in the world do not have a Tom Killian. Indeed, since Hiroshige, there's no one like him. So we're very lucky. And with that, I am done. Thank you.
Yeah, I get to pick people to ask questions, and he gets to answer them unless they're really easy, and then I'll just chime in. Simon. Question from Simon. It's a good question. If it's someone's first time in the Sierra, where do you recommend that they start? Probably the bottom.
Yeah. Well, this is a good question, right? And everybody's got a slightly different answer for it, and it does depend on how strong are they, and how used are they to altitude, and how much they like to sweat and suffer in the outdoors. And so you have to modulate. But 50 years ago, last week, I went in at Emerald Bay and went up to Eagle Lake and over to the Velmas and over to Schmeidel and over to the Crystal Range. And it worked for me. So Desolation is what I call a pocket Sierra. It's lower, it's smaller, but it's just as beautiful as anywhere else in the High Sierra. So if you have someone that and this is something that we've learned in Maine, try something a little easier first and see if they like it. And then if you were going to go up to the High Sierra, the bigger stuff, which I call 6 times bigger for reasons that are only partly true. But if you had to go up 500 feet in Desolation, you often would have to go up 3,000 feet in the Southern Sierra. So that's why I call it 6 times bigger. I would say South Lake over Bishop Pass into Ducey Basin. That's why I took the New Yorker guy there. It's so beautiful, it's so easy, and it's got everything. Yeah. We're going to give you a microphone which is...
So on your off-trail excursions, do you mainly use guidebooks, or do you ever just kind of go for it and see what's out there?
We've done both. At this point, we kind of know what's out there, but you can get locally lost, for sure, in the sense that you know where you are in the roughest way, but you don't know how to get to where you want to go next. And getting lost is kind of fun for a while. But guidebooks, the Secor book, Peaks, Passes, and Glaciers, that's like the Bible of a reference. And then Phil Arnaud's book, High Sierra, he's inspirational. And in my book, I have an annotated bibliography, and some guidebooks are in there. Maps are better. I think it's fun to look at the map through the winter, or Google Earth now, and say, I wonder if we could do that in a week. And sometimes the answer is no, but it's fun to find out. So I don't follow other people's suggestions where to go. Right from the get-go, and in fact, ridiculously, we would drive from San Diego to Desolation, passing the entire Southern Sierra on the way, because the name Desolation had convinced us it was the best place on Earth. So that was us being ignorant, but we remained ignorant the whole time. We're still ignorant.
Hi. Backpacking friends of mine want to know if you're aware of any progress being made on returning Hetch Hetchy to its natural state.
Well, I think not. I am going to speak to the Restore Hetch Hetchy annual meeting on October 7th, somewhere in the Bay Area. I don't know where, but I'll be there. And I will say to them that Hetch Hetchy being returned, having the dam taken away and returned to a high meadow, it's going to happen. It will be beautiful when it happens and important. It might not happen for a while, like during our lifetimes, but there's no rush. This is what I'm going to say to them. I don't know how happy they'll be with my talk. But here's what they would say, and I want to share with everybody. You can conserve 95% of the water and 75% of the electricity out of the Hetch Hetchy reservoir down in Don Pedro and Lake Eleanor and Cherry Lake. So, and that was obvious even when they made the Hetch Hetchy Dam. So as I say in my book, that was a deliberate murder of the idea of the national park, that you couldn't get away from the imperative to make money and to have water. And making a national park wasn't even good enough. They managed to flood one of the most beautiful valleys in the High Sierra, one of the big three. And so I have this fairy tale. There were 3 sisters One of them they made queen, one of them they forgot about entirely, and one of them they murdered. So Hetch Hetchy should come back, and when it does, it'll be fabulous. But no rush. And right now, no progress. Progress was being made until 9/11. And on that day, there were many beautiful ideas that were taken off the table. I see a hand or two.
So which is the one they forgot about?
Kings Canyon. When you go to Kings Canyon now, you are driving back into 1925, which is a great thing to do. That windy little road and the fact that it's a V canyon rather than a U canyon, and the fact that it isn't world famous and it's hard to get to, and from no point in Kings Canyon can you see all of Kings Canyon. It's almost too big. So all those factors mean that you could get into a campsite in Kings Canyon tomorrow, no problem. Walk-in basis, and it'd be empty. It's got a really poor facilities, but only in the sense of comparing it to Yosemite. It's kind of fun to be in the 1925 of the forgotten Kings Canyon. Many of you will say, well, hey, Kings Canyon is my favorite entry, and you just take the hit of a remarkably long, slow drive, and it's fantastic when you get there. But it's also a deep hole, like Rhodes End is at 5,000 feet, and Granite Pass is 11,000 feet. So your first day is going to be a hard one.
So how many trips have you done? I mean, in an average summer, or recently, or in the past, how much of your summer do you spend backpacking?
Well, it's changed wildly over my life, to tell you the truth. I'm a record keeper. I like to keep calendars filled up, and I keep them. So I know that I've done around 150 trips. And I know most of them. I can list them all. But they add up. Some years there would be 4 days in the Sierra. Some years there would be 6 weeks in the Sierra. And so it's been back and forth and back and forth. I added it up in the roughest way when I was writing this book, and I think it comes to about 2 years of Sierra time, which, lucky me. I mean, Kenneth Rexroth, the poet from San Francisco, spent about 5 years in the Sierra. John Muir spent 5 years straight and then went back when he could. So, and some of you you live in the Sierra, so how do you even count it? But for me, being living in Davis, California, at almost sea level, 2 years, it feels like I did a good thing. It's certainly some of the greatest days of my life have been up there, and I've made strong efforts to get there. And have to give thanks to my wife for covering the home front, since I was ostensibly the house husband, taking care of the boys, whilst my wife was a full-time chemist for U.S. Geological Survey. So when I left, I think it was a little scrambly at home. But then I would take the boys up with me to Desolation to ease the pressure on that front. And I tried to keep a balance. There's a story I tell in the High Sierra book. You can fall in love with the Sierra to the point that it wrecks your life in the lowlands. And Randy Morganson, for Norman Clyde, it was a huge comfort. But one of my closest friends, his life in the lowlands was extremely difficult because of this intense love for the Sierra. And I think I've kept a balance. I hope, dear.
You talked about a sense of grieving that you got over for the High Sierra for climate change impacts. Would you say, how are your feelings about Antarctica and the Arctic and your travels up there?
Well,
up or down?
It's a good question, and I'm writing about it now. I'm writing a nonfiction book about the Antarctic that is very similar to the High Sierra, although it will be about 1/3 as long, because I have only been there twice, as opposed to 150 times. It won't be 75 times shorter, but it will be shorter. And I've never been to the Arctic, although I would like to go. So the Antarctic is suddenly important to all of us in a way that it never was before, because if those glaciers slide into the ocean, sea level can go so much higher that it is shocking to realize. If it was an ice-free planet, sea level would be 270 feet higher than it is now. And although that's not going to happen anytime soon, a mild melt of Greenland and Antarctica could very quickly put sea level 10 feet, 20 feet higher. And then civilization is wrecked. So I'm writing about it partly because there's a plan to slow those glaciers down, which I wrote about in Ministry for the Future. And now the glaciologists who gave me the idea for my novel are asking for help as a PR person to get them more help to get studies done. So there's an ongoing process to try to effectively suck the water out from underneath the glaciers that are lubricating their slide into the Antarctic Ocean. If that were to happen, they would slow down to their previous speeds. And it wouldn't be the total solution, because nothing is the total solution, but it would be a good thing to try to do. So now I love Antarctica, but when I say that, I'm thinking it's not the same kind of love as the love for the Sierra Nevada. It's not a human place. It's like easy travel to other planets. It's really cold, and it's nothing but ice, except in the dry valleys. And so why it's so attractive is perhaps something that you in the Tahoe area might recognize. Small town life. You're down there, and you're in a town of 1,000 people, and you play cards with them at night, or you go to knitting circle, or you have book club. You return to small town life, and people, and then you're out in this, you're on the surface of Europa, the moon of Jupiter. There's nothing but ice in all directions, and you feel very tight with your community, let's put it that way, as the only people in this endless, vast, icy waste. Wilderness isn't even the right word for it, I think. You need a different word for Antarctica. So it's interesting to think about, and I do not worry about it, but what it could do to the civilization. And like, I was a beach kid when I was young, grew up on the beaches of Orange County, Southern California. I loved the beach. And the beaches are doomed. And that may be no matter what we do. They're almost like these Sierra glaciers. A very small sea level rise will drown every single beach in the world, because by definition, they are at sea level. So as much as one loves beaches and beach culture, they are in terrible trouble, because they're another canary. And the canaries are dying. So beaches, go to one while you can.
Can you comment on how being in the Sierra Nevada affected your writing of your science fiction and your science fiction worlds?
I can try. It's been a bit mysterious to me, but what I can bring to science fiction is it's no longer the cardboard set that is the bridge of the USS Enterprise. In other words, science fiction was an urban literature of mostly guys, mostly engineers, mostly New Yorkers, and science fiction was indoors. So you could have the planet Trantor in Asimov, Manhattan, covering a whole planet. How would that work? Who cares? It's great. So what I brought was the Sierra Nevada, and I said, look, Mars, it could be just like the Sierra Nevada, which is absolutely not true, but it made for a really good story. And so the Sierra has given me groundedness and planets. I can write about planets with some sense that you're really there. And I think that's what it's given me. It's been an advantage. It's been a branding device. You can do ChatGPT-3, write me a Kim Stanley Robinson story. And it's a terrible story, but it's recognizably my ideas. John Boone was sitting around the campfire on Mars, thinking, we should have a better world. And it goes on like this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I am pegged at this point. I am a walking cliche, which is cool, right? I mean, at my point in life, to actually be a cliche is, it's an accomplishment.
I actually had two questions. I'll let you decide which one you want to answer. One, I wanted to ask you about your writing process as an aspiring writer, but also when I read your books, I get this impression that I'm largely hanging out with you, your characters, and how much is that true? And drug use is a common theme in your books, in your novels, and I was curious if you wanted to touch on that topic.
Let's see, maybe I should answer the writing process question here. Now, my parents died. My mountain guru best friend Terry died. I could write the Sierra book honestly at last, because with those three alive, I wouldn't have been able to say what I really thought in multiple areas. I wouldn't have wanted to distress my mom. Never would wanted that. I had the greatest parents in the world. So, I mean, I grew up, let's put it this way, I went to college between 1970 and 1974, and some acid was taken. And I'm glad. It taught me a lot. And around 1980 or so, I thought, it was in Desolation. You just poisoned yourself to get high. How stupid is that? And that was the last time. So I went through a cycle, and I don't need to rehearse all the drugs. That's the only one that was at all interesting, to tell you the truth. And the rest I had nothing to do with. So LSD is now becoming back, which is hilarious and rather reaffirming. Not that we weren't stupid, because we had no idea what we were taking. Oh, a little pill. Oh, a little piece of construction paper. Why not? Boom. And then for 24 hours, you're in a different world. That's not a smart thing to do. But now, therapy, oh my God, alcoholism, end-of-life depression, end-of-life anxiety, heavy depression. 1 or 2 LSD trips, and these people are feeling a lot better. And no one knows why. And like some of us old hippies have our suspicions as to why, but it's not explainable. So I'm interested, and I'm glad to say that my first day in the High Sierra, down there at Emerald Bay, my friend Terry stopped me and Joe and said, look, you guys, eat this. And we were already in the habit and said, what a good idea. And I tell this story. I have never come down from that day. Never, never, never. It's been, so is that good? Well, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a real feeling. I was changed that day in ways that made me into a Sierra person, made me into a science fiction person, a Buddhist. Well, it wasn't the drug. It was the combination of everything. And then as for writing, just write every day. It's not, you don't want to wait for magic to hit. You don't want to be a prima donna. You want to treat it like carpentry. I put in my hours. I used to be Monday through Friday and take the weekends off. Now I'm Sunday through Sunday, just write every day, because I don't have to stop on the weekends, and it keeps the rhythm going. There's no tricks to it. It's just a matter of putting your butt in a chair, which is boring. So I wouldn't recommend the writer's life. And as a writer, moving outdoors and writing outdoors, that's a key. Don't stay indoors to write. You don't have to. Find some shade, get your laptop, write outdoors, and in California you can do it. And that's the whole secret there. Just work. All right, this is going to be the last question.
Okay, well, as a father, what is your advice to your children for their future in dealing with climate change?
Oh. Oh. How can I say it? Everybody's going to have to deal with climate change, and young people are going to have to live with it. It's never going to go away, even in their lifetimes. Whether we can bend the curve, flatten the curve, as they used to say in COVID, and stop putting CO2 into the atmosphere and start sucking some down. If that happens in their lifetime, it's a huge success. It's a utopian future, and it can still happen. So young people in general, I mean, my sons are not that young, and they're a particular case of their own. They will have to deal with it in their own ways, and I try not to advise them. It's getting too old to be dad. But for young people that I talk to in classes, no matter what they're interested in, there's going to be a climate change angle to their work. Every field is going to have a green possibility if you follow it. So, this is maybe I can end with this. Remember the 80s. There were bumper stickers that said, the one who dies with the most toys wins. Now, that was either somebody making a joke about 80s culture, or they really believed it, and it depended if it was a Toyota or a BMW, whatever. But that phrase was existential despair. It was saying life has no meaning. You get into American culture, you consume, maybe you produce, but mostly you consume, and then you die. What's the point? Well, now we've got climate change. We either solve it or civilization crashes. Meaning has come back. There is no question that we have an existential meaning, which is to get through this century without a mass extinction event. The problem of meaninglessness has gone away. And so young people are looking at me going, maybe I'd be better off without meaning. This is a rather grim meaning or an intense one, an inescapable fate. Most people don't like inescapable fates, but we all have them. Even if there weren't climate change, we have our inescapable fates. So with this one, they have a project, and this is existentialism again. Since the world means nothing, you have to make up the meaning. And the way you make up your meaning is to have a project. You pursue your project. And that project organizes all the rest of your meaning systems and your life in general, and it can bring you a sense of reward, or at least that you aren't floundering in existential despair. So this is what I say to young people. My own sons would go like, Dad, we've heard this so often. Not again. So I save it for others. Thank you.
So I wanted to once again thank Kim Stanley Robinson for this wonderful presentation, these insights, not just into his writings, but into his trip. Other kind of trip, not. And it really is wonderful. You know, reading the books is one thing, but having you here is another. I wanted to apologize to those of you who came here expecting to be able to buy books and have them autographed. That was a terrible oversight on our part. If we can get him back again next year for a different talk, we won't make that mistake a second time. So with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you for supporting science in the Sierra and at Lake Tahoe.